Thank you everyone for attending. I realize that lunch hour is very precious, and of course, while you're eating, if you need to have a snooze, go ahead and do so. No offense. Being wellness through personalized nutrition. Of course, we all have to eat. So what it means, what is the definition of nutrition? A lot of times, it's such a broad term. I always look at it as that when you have to eat, you're basically taking food source from external environment into your body, and it applies to all living beings. You could be a plant, you could be, animal of all species. But the nutrition is what gives you the energy to grow, to maintain, and build and multiply. So overall, I think for human beings, nutrition means a lot more. It goes beyond just eating, because it's a whole bunch of social dynamics and health relevance that comes with it. Whether you are healthy or you have illnesses. And so we have to modify our nutrition accordingly. And the timeline is very important, because when you're born, you have to actually literally go back to the time of fertilization. And when the embryo is inside the womb, that's where nutrition starts. And the first heartbeat is detected by the age of 4 weeks. So when the heartbeat begins, literally that's life, and you depend on the placenta and your mom's womb and feed you 24/7. So for 9 months, you have nothing to worry about. Then the stress comes when you're born. The minute you're born, you're stressed out. And of course, as your first 6 months of life, you breastfeed, you don't have nothing to worry about. So your mom is the one that has to say, well, how much do I eat? If I breastfeed, do I have to eat more? Which later on you'll know that you have to. And then when you're a child, you have to also realize that the name of the game in the household depends on your parents. If you don't eat your vegetables, if you don't finish your meal, you can be told that, well, you're not going to get your dessert. So when the time comes to say, well, every step of the way you have to adjust. So as a child, you learn what you like or don't like. And then as a teenager, when you start to exert yourself, some eating disorder will come into play, because that's when anorexia nervosa, bulimia will come into play. Because as a child, you restricted too much. As an adult, you will reject, so it comes out. So these are things that we don't see that in other species. Human beings are the ones that we see a lot of. And of course, later on, when you have your own family, you're going to have to deal with what they like, and that will affect what you take in. So it gives you a little bit of a timeline as to how we as human beings have to adjust. Because as you get older and you eat the same amount, your metabolic rate goes down. You don't burn as well. Because the percentages, efficiency is like an old car versus a new, efficiency goes down. And here we are, we have basically what is the conventional diet that we all aim for. So the body mass index is pretty much a standard now. The normal for most people is if your BMI is 24.9 and below. If you're over 25 and over, you are overweight. And if you're over 30, you are obese. And if you're 40 and above, you're morbidly obese. Now, of course, there's also the other extreme. You don't want to be anorexic and become BMI of 18 and below. So what is considered a generic diet? A generic diet, when you need your carbohydrate, let's say 50%, and same time you can have 20% protein and fat 30. Of course, there's a wide range what people like to do. What is an average caloric intake per person? Based on your body size, we are all very different. As we grow up, we change. We have different habits, we have different occupations. So the demand of caloric intake is different. And we look at an average person. Let's take an average person of, say, 5 feet. This is something that 5 feet, you probably should take about 1,200 calories per day. And every inch that you're above 5 feet, you add 100 calories. So if somebody is 6 feet, you have 2,200, right? So that's on average. That's just to stay alive now. Now, so the demand in life and daily living, it varies among all of us. Somebody who is fairly active, you do normal daily activity, you add 10% of that. So that'll be, somebody who's, say, 6 foot, and 10%, you add 220 calories in addition to the 22. And then that if you're moderately, you do a lot of not only house cleaning, you do a lot of shopping, taking care of kids, you add 20%. And then people who are very active, let's say you ride bike to like a lot of you, ride your bike to work and all that, you add 30. Now there are people who do, train for a triathlon. They may have to double. People who does Tour de France, they will have to calculate what kind of competition requirement they need to burn. It could be, quadruple that, okay? So now, when we have a personalized nutritional need, we have to also look at many factors. We have the internal, which is the body itself. And then we have the external that you cannot influence, is actually affecting you. So let's start with the internal. So your body mass index, the goal is individualized. So you know roughly what calories you take in per day. And that can vary according to your holidays or, whatever your activity is. So the habits, on the other hand, is also very important. But day to day, let's say usually somebody who's a vegetarian and they marry somebody who is not, wow, we have a problem. A problem in the sense that you're going to have to negotiate who does the cooking and who does this and that. So metabolic rate I touched on earlier on is that, well, with age, after 30, your metabolic rate is different. Just like a car, your fuel efficiency is different. As you get older, your metabolic rate has dropped to 30% below your normal adult as you become geriatric. So these are factors that comes into play that you have to adjust. But most people don't do this, and it's always unfortunate that's when they put on weight as an adult. Now look at stress now. So I already pinpointed people on the run, they eat, and a lot of times they don't eat. You look at all the accountants, they say, oh, April comes around and they have so many cases, they are staying in late, they eat late, they skip lunch, all that kind of stuff is very stressful, not psychologically, but also physically. Because what happens is that if you don't eat, and let's say morning you start at 6 and you work right through lunch, and 3 o'clock comes around and now it's time to sit down, have a cup of coffee and have something to eat. You'll be starving. So when you're starving, what do you eat? You eat fast, Guys, for instance, if you run late to a buffet and have 15 minutes before it stops to close, you pile on that plate, all right? And you want to go back 3 times before they close. And so within that 15 minutes, you gulp on 2 or 3 plates, right? Now, that's stressful eating. And I'll come back to the implication behind that. So marital status, if you have terrible divorce or whatever, that makes a big difference to your life. Your appetite goes down, you get depressed. These are things that unfortunately is everyday life. And we don't know, looking at each other, who has what. But it's important that you know and understand what you're going through and what the person next to you is undergoing. These are very important. Now, family upbringing is very important too, because family in many ways is influencing you from day one. As a baby, as a child, you learn your do's and don'ts. Now, illnesses, unfortunately, happens to all of us. This is something that nobody can escape. I have people who live up to 104. But they still have illnesses, and unfortunately, but that's, if you have specific illnesses, like you got a stroke. After a stroke, what can you do? You can't go out and buy your own stuff. You're relying on people who bring in foods. I have one gentleman who stroked out at the age of 50. He fell off a ladder and broke his neck while trying to pick apples. So he's been totally dependent, to his wife for 18 years. He's lying in bed for 18 years. Now, socioeconomic is very important because people who live by paycheck is going to be very governed by, end of the month, if you run out of money, what do you feed your kids with? So you go and get fast foods, snacks, things like that, which is very high in carbs, and so they end up picking up more weight. You know, these are unfortunate. But at the same time, if you live far away and your shopping center is miles away, you know, the kids may have to, especially in Africa and places like that, they have to walk miles just to buy something, right? Or even, you know, rural area here in America, I think there are people who are malnourished because of these reasons. External factors, as I mentioned already, culture is very important. Just think of nutrition, like for instance, in investment, you can understand that China takes about 6% of our soybean exports. And you can imagine the nutrition will change drastically if if a tariff on that supply and demand is going to affect them tremendously. So culturally can affect individual nutrition in the long run. And of course, people with alcoholism in their home, you know, they don't eat as well. The kids are probably, people on drugs, they're probably not as well nourished. The kids will have to fend for themselves, and may affect their overall nutrition. Occupation, as I mentioned, if you're a fireman, if you're a policeman or military, you have to be a certain standard. You cannot be, they all wake up at the same time, die at the same time, everything is the same. Now, traveling, of course, people who have to be mobile, whether you're a pilot, people who needs to travel for their job, very important, because your meal is whatever they make in front of you. If you're a visitor out of town, you have to eat what they eat. So how do you control your caloric intake and nutrition? Every meal is going to be different. I mean, whatever's on the menu is what you have to eat. Access to food and facilities is very important. Where you live, how close you are to somewhere you can buy fast food or not. The distance, whatever. Do you have a vehicle? Are you unable to get up and do things on your own? The access is very important. Or you totally dependent on home care and people delivering food to you, like Meals on Wheels for HIV patients. Compliance also, the ability to handle what you're allowed to do is important. So even though you may be told, okay, here you are, Mrs. Smith, you're compliant, you should not exceed so many calories a day. It's easy for us doctors to tell you what to do, but it's much harder whether you can actually deliver. Now, social engagement depends on how active you are. Of course, tailgates, you have birthday parties, you have celebrations, Christmas. It goes on and on. I mean, and the more friends you have, the more sociable you become, and the more ups and downs you have. But it's just to give you a glimpse of what comes into nutrition.